scanning and flying and at least trying to give a presence over that is when the call came. One of the gunners in the Humvees had taken an RPG right in the face, and huge firefight was going on. The radio was going nuts, and I remember the poor driver is just screaming bloody murder. I'm trying to find out where you're taking fire from. Adam's getting a grid to the convoy commander. We finally get them out of the kill zone. I'm talking to Colonel Scott in the Black Hawk. It's the only time I've ever been scared in the cockpit.
Welcome to Combat Story. I'm Ryan Fugit, and I served Warzone tours as an Army attack helicopter pilot and CIA officer over a 15-year career. I'm fascinated by the experiences of the elite in combat. On this show, I interview some of the best to understand what combat felt like on their front lines. This is Combat Story. On this episode, we hear the combat story of J.T. Snow, U.S. Army Chief Warrant Officer for retired and longtime gun pilot. J.T. was the quintessential Apache driver, amassing 5,000 flight hours, 2,000 of those in combat across 4 deployments, 2 to Iraq and 2 to Afghanistan. J.T. also had the unenviable position of watching his son deploy to the same war zones he fought in, both on the ground and then in the air as the next generation of aviator. Enjoy. So we're sitting here in Clarksville, Tennessee, which for those vets and active duty members out there will recognize as the home of the storied 101st Airborne Division at Fort Campbell. I think it's an appropriate place to meet because, JT, you spent most of your career here post 9/11, if I recall correctly.
Correct, yeah, from 2003 to 2011, my last tour here.
And I think there's several directions we could take this, but what I wanted to do is kind of go back to the beginning. And if you can talk to us about where you were when you first signed up for the Army, kind of how old you were, what year was it, just the location, some of those atmospherics.
Sure. Well, I was a weird kid. At 7, I wanted to be a helicopter pilot. So my father, who's a retired master sergeant, was in aviation in Vietnam, and all through high school, that was it. I can't even think back far enough to remember exactly when, but probably 14, 15 years old, Hickam Air Force Base, Hawaii. We were at an air show, and I was sitting in the back of a Cobra, and I told my dad, yes, this is it. This is what I want to do. So he was in recruiting his last stint there in the Army, and knew what it took to get in. So my senior year of high school, I went and took all the tests, the flight aptitude test, the flight physical, did the interviews, and was accepted in October of 1989. And then from there, went to basic training in January. And then flight school, showed up to Fort Rucker in March of 1990.
So you're how old when you get to Fort Rucker?
I was 18.
And by the time you graduate from flight school, are you straight off to a unit right away?
I was. When I went through flight school, we did multi-track. So I did 40 hours in a Huey, wanted guns so bad. I was lucky enough to get Cobras, which there was no multi-track for Apaches. You had to go through another airframe first. So went through the Cobra track and then started the Apache course the very next day. And then went through A-model Apache during that winter time, and Desert Storm kicked off there that next winter. And then I graduated in May of 1991 and showed up to Illesheim, Germany in October of 1991.
That's crazy. So I would like to actually go back to your role, to kind of that experience in flight school, because I think both you and I have family that have visited Fort Rucker in the past. Right. And my father was a Huey pilot. Your father was a gunner on Hueys. So for you to make the decision to go into guns, what was behind that for you? Why guns and not lift aircraft?
I'm sure personality has something to do with it. I'm the oldest. I'm a Type A. Always been aggressive. And my father, being a door gunner, talked about his engagements. He did a lot of cross-border ops and talked about them all the time. A lot of books written about a lot of the missions that he was on. One Medal of Honor winner posthumously with the SF group. My father got an Air Medal with Valor, which was very rare for door gunners to get. So just the stories, just I don't want to say the bravado, but the excitement. You know, he was 18, 19-year-old kid, and that was the best time he had in his life. And I just couldn't imagine flying anything else. That's just my personality. It's who I am. It would be like putting on someone else's shoes. It just wouldn't fit.
You know, I distinctly remember when I was probably 10, driving across Arizona with my dad. Just he and I in the car. We're listening to a basketball game on the radio. Nothing out there on the horizon. And I just remember saying, Dad, tell me some of those stories from Vietnam. And he had a Silver Star and Distinguished Flying Cross, kind of some of those missions that you see in We Were Soldiers. And I just remember thinking, that sounds like the kind of adventure that I want to have at some point. So it sounds like
absolutely
very similar.
Absolutely.
One of the other things I remember distinctly from flight school was the day we had to select our airframe. So for us, and this was 2003, so after the war kicked off, we're all 30 of us from our class are sitting in one classroom, and the Army says we have 30 airframes available. Person number 1 on the order of merit list, get up and pick your airframe, and that's off the table then. Right. How was it in 1989, 1990?
A little bit different. It was by order of merit, and it was by track. You had the 58 track, the Huey track, the Cobra track, and the Blackhawk track. So I was competing really generally against the guys in my Cobra class, and I was actually the last one to know. We'd put in what we wanted, and I knew it was between me and one other guy named Mark Beecham, and very smart, hard charger. And I was flying a flight contact, or maybe I was in gunnery at that time. I was in gunnery in Cobras. And I came home that evening, and when I opened the door to our little apartment there in Enterprise, there was this huge Apache poster hung on the wall, and all my buddies were there. And I'm like, what's going on? And they're like, you did it. You're number 1. You're going to get Apaches. Yeah. And I couldn't believe it. And and I tell my kids this story today is that it came down to one test. I beat him on one test, and that one test changed both of our lives tremendously. He stayed Cobras, was in a midair, went to Somalia, got all shot up, and got out of the Army, where my career went its own way. Yeah. You know, but I tell my kids all the time how that one test made all the difference in the world. So don't ever think one test doesn't mean something. Right.
So what test was it? Was it instruments? Was it a gunnery test? Was it paper actually in the aircraft?
It had to be gunnery. It was a gunnery exam. And again, it was just one of those things that he was from Maryland, grew up in the city. I was a country kid who grew up around guns my whole life. So I had an advantage, and it actually worked out for me there in the end because I knew ballistics, and it was my passion. That's all I wanted to do. So, you know, no hard feelings between he and I. We were still good friends, still keep in touch, but that's how I found out.
Yeah. Okay. I also wanted to briefly touch on the warrant officer role in the Army. So I think even those who are familiar with the military in general might not have the same understanding of what a warrant officer does within the Army specifically. It varies by occupation and branch, of course. So I was just wondering if you could explain in your own words what that role means for the Army, and then in particular in aviation.
Okay. An aviation warrant his primary job is to be a pilot. The Army puts a lot of training, a lot of money into him to be a technical and tactical professional, an expert at that. And same with the other MOSs for any other warrant. But our job is we're the line pilots, we're the maintenance pilots, we're the instructor pilots. We are the workforce behind Army aviation when it pertains to putting hands on the flight controls. And, you know, making the missions. We're the ones who the commissioned officers lean on in order to give them that technical and tactical background and experience and knowledge in order to meet the mission based on what, you know, the command guidance that comes down from us. We can use our experience because that's all we've ever done, and tell them, well, yes, sir, you can do it this way or you can do it that way based on our experience, our, you know, knowledge. We would normally recommend this course of action. So we're again, technical and tactical experts at aviation.
Mm-hmm. And there are several tracks within Army aviation,
Absolutely,
right?
yeah. There's instructor pilot, maintenance test pilot, what used to be the ACE EWOs, or the electronic warfare officers now, once they changed those to tactical operations officers, and now they're called aviation mission, AMSOs, aviation mission specialist.
I didn't know they changed it.
They did. It's like the fourth one.
Okay.
But those are the tracks that you normally go down. Again, maintenance officers more into fixing the aircraft. Instructor pilots do all the progressions and training for the junior aviators and yearly evals. And then you have safety officers, of course, who make sure aviation is a dangerous world. So you need those guys around. And then, of course, the ACWO, they take care of all of the aviation survivability equipment, tactics, techniques on defeating whatever the threat may be, whether it's RF, IR, small arms.
Right. So, and just before we get into that first assignment in ILLASIGN, which is coincidental because that's also where my first assignment was, out of flight school, straight to ILLASIGN. I did want to just give people an idea of what the Apache carries with it and kind of what its role is on the battlefield as we start talking about your experiences in some of those battlefields. Right. So for the Apache, compared to a lift aircraft, what does it do for the force on the ground? Kind of what was its mission pre 9/11, post 9/11, and you've seen both sides of it.
Right. The Apache was designed during the Cold War era to defeat Russian tanks. We were the tank killers. Our job was to, the Air Force would take out radars, and we would be those guys who would guard the Russian horde coming through the Fulda Gap, which is why we carry Hellfire missiles, 2.75 rockets, and 30-millimeter Gatling gun. And the Gatling gun really wasn't made to engage ground forces as it was in order to destroy more light-skin type vehicles. So our job, again, it was initially designed for that purpose. Once the Cold War was over, then we kind of looked for another, reason on why we have this type of weapon. Again, always for the tank threat. But as Iraq kicked off, again, it was used for that in the deep attack role and defeating the armor forces. And then helping the ground guys as they move forward in order to take ground. And that's where I think the big evolution of Army aviation and our tactics probably came about, was because of Operation Iraqi Freedom. Once we started putting ground forces on the ground and occupying space, we had to relook how we did our entire mission. Mm-hmm. We have these great optics, but now 90% of what we do is out the window. Yeah. We're looking for IEDs on the road. We're not designed for that. So everything we did tactically changed, or had to change. And so we had to incorporate new TTPs, new ways of fighting this beast. We stayed low initially during the invasion because we had to stay out of the Sapphire threat, especially with the shoulder-fired weapons, which we lost quite a few aircraft to. But then once we mounted some IR defeating equipment on, then we were able to bring our altitudes a little higher, but then we didn't have the sensors. Mm-hmm. So then we made better sensors, and now you get to Afghanistan. And then so we started changing TTPs. Mm-hmm. But that's mainly our role now, as it's progressed from the Fulda Gap, taking out Russian tanks, to supporting the ground forces as they do convoy, doing convoy security operations. Mm-hmm. And now in Afghanistan, it's protecting the ground forces, normally reacting to fire, not necessarily going out and looking for the enemy threat. Right. So more of a reconnaissance role.
Okay, exactly right. And just as we talk about your time in ILLASIGN, I imagine you were so focused on that Fulda Gap threat, just day in and day out, kind of like if you were in Korea looking at the DMZ, right?
That was it.
So let's transition then to that first assignment for you. So I think no matter what job you're in, whether it's the military, the government, the private sector, newcomers and outsiders really have to kind of prove themselves before they're brought into the fold, the brotherhood, whatever it is. I think the military and law enforcement arenas are kind of two of the more extreme cases where rookies really need to kind of earn that respect of their peers, their superiors. So when you joined before 9/11, kind of what was that like at your first unit? How did you have to earn your way into the club as a junior warrant officer?
It was tough, mainly because Desert Storm had kicked off while I was in flight school. So when there was me and another W1 that showed up to our troop in Illisheim. So everyone in the troop had combat patches and combat experience. Although the war lasted 100 hours, you know, it was the brotherhood. So we were the outsiders, and we had to prove ourselves. And there were really three ways that you had to do it back then. And it's changed a lot, especially in the Warrant Officer Corps. The first way you had to prove yourself was physically, which is kind of counterintuitive to what a lot of people think of warrant officers nowadays. But it really was. We had to prove ourselves physically. We had to be the fastest at the PT runs. We had to do the most push-ups. They physically pushed us. So it helped being only 19 years old at the time. So I could pretty much outrun anybody there.
Right.
So physically, we had to prove ourselves. Mentally, of course, we were the younger generation in that computers and PCs had just came about. So we had a better idea. We were more technologically advanced as far as our education was concerned. So with the Apache, and as things progressed through even those first couple of years, we started getting newer things, newer equipment. We took to it much faster. We could pick up on it much faster. They used to call us the new breed. And you got to keep in mind, a lot of our senior guys were Vietnam vets.
Yeah.
Most of my senior warrants, as I grew up as a W1, W2, were all Vietnam veterans. You know, they'd only been removed 20 years at that point. So that was the second way, was just that familiarity with technology and the mental aspect of being sharp, knowing everything. And the third way, being in Germany, was you know, being able to hold your own. There was, and in variety of ways, but physically, mentally, you know, it was a mind game. I remember the very first door I ever went through as a junior warrant. There was a big sign on the door, and it says, "Leave your feelings at the door." You know, so but at that time it was a big rivalry because we still had 58s, Blackhawks, and Apaches all in the same unit. This was before we went through ARI, so it was a good camaraderie and being in the CAV. But those three things, I think, were the big key. Was that, you know, hold your own at work mentally and physically, but also hold your own, period, at the bars. You know, no matter where you went, you could be at the PX, and if someone gave you crap, then, you know, you didn't just cow tie and take it. You know, once you gave them both barrels, and all right, that kid's going to be okay.
Nice.
You know, so
right. And was there, if it was the CAV, was it 6.6 CAV?
2.6 CAV.
You were in 2.6.
I was in 2.6 CAV.
Okay. Yeah. So I arrived to 6.6 CAV the week after they redeployed from OIF 1. So right as they came back, I was the guy without the combat patch, the lieutenant, the platoon leader. I'm looking at all these guys who had just come back, and the fear at that time, as I'm sure you recall, was, oh my God, I just missed the war, because it's going to be Gulf War again. And these guys came back. I will never have a patch, and I have to earn it some other way. I have to be better. I have to be in the simulator more. I have to work harder. I have to be physically better than all of these guys. So I distinctly remember having that outsider feeling in Illisheim, no less, in 6.6 CAV at the time. So was there a moment when you really felt like you had been brought into that brotherhood? Was it a check ride or an event?
Yes. Back then, you were a W1 for 2 years. You didn't get your bar until you graduated, where now you get your bar after 6 weeks, and then you go through flight school as a W1. So you had 2 years to be a W1.
Wow.
And I progressed. One guy, another W1, had gotten there about 6 months ahead of me. So there was a little competition there, and he was prior enlisted. So he had more knowledge on the Army than I did, but I was better in the aircraft than he was. And I remember we were both going through RO progression at the same time, and I made, we'd already gone through RO progression. I was going through pilot command training as a W1.
Wow.
And, but again, back then it wasn't that big a deal. No one thought of it like they do now, because now you're a W1 for 2 weeks, and now you're W2, so you don't really see those anymore. But I made PIC before he did, And
PIC was probably still a big deal.
Oh, it was huge.
Then, right?
It was
could you take a second to explain? 'Cause that's a major milestone, I would say.
It was. After progressing to RL1 you show up as 3, you progress to RL2 doing your basic maneuvers, and then from 2 to 1, it's all the mission task. And for us during that time, like you said, during that Cold War era, it was deep attack, deep attack, deep attack, hitting passage points plus or minus 15 seconds. There was no 30 seconds. The standard has gotten looser and looser every year.
Which is odd, right?
It is very odd. But, you had to hit that passage point at the right time for the seed, and being able to navigate in Germany at night on a legacy Fleer that, in horrible weather, and doing Doppler approaches back. I mean, it was very, very tough. But I remember my PIC ride, the guy I flew with, phenomenal aviator, Mel Dixon. He flew me out just to the middle of nowhere, Germany, and turned off the Doppler. He was in the front seat. He turned it off, and he goes, "Get me home."
Is this daytime? Nighttime?
This was actually nighttime.
Nighttime.
Yeah, he goes.
Right.
He said, "Get me home." And I'm like, okay, well, roll in 0 or H, which was on those old Dopplers back then. Roll in 0 or H, and he says, "No, get me home. Doppler's not working. Get me home."
Wow.
And I remember thinking, I was like, okay, I'd never had that happen. Never anyone tried to do that to me before. So I said, okay, well, what do I have? Check your toolbox real quick. So I looked at my toolbox. I'm looking around the cockpit. You only had one radio in the back seat, but I had an ADF. So I said, okay. Well,
another
navigational tool. So I was like, well, let's just see if I can tune in the NDB for ILLISIME and see if it picks up. And I heard a very weak signal, and the needle just wasn't swinging in that direction. And so I started circling and circling and circling, and I finally got visibility with it, and it pretty much hung within 10 degrees of where it should be. And I started taking my way back and got back no problem. And that was it. That was really, decision making. What have you got available to you? And I remember I was so proud of myself, that I'm this young 20-year-old kid, and I just, but I started looking back, and every IP I'd ever flown with up to that point had been phenomenal. I really didn't have a bad IP all the way through flight school, and most of them all were Vietnam vets. So they always told me, use what you have available to you. Don't waste a thing, not one thing. Don't ever take it for granted. You can always use it. So
clearly that sticks out in your mind as one of those moments that
absolutely.
you don't forget, right? That PC ride.
No.
And it's no small order being in a unit less than 2 years and being a PIC.
Right.
I mean, that's rare, I would say.
Very rare, yes.
No matter what time of what era we're looking at today or 20 years ago, I think that anybody would agree. And that's a very stressful moment for any aviator. So you kind of feel like after that, you landed and you were somewhat accepted now.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, and I remember catching Mel by accident bragging about me to other aviators, because our company areas, we didn't have ceilings. It was just kind of, sheetrock walls with no roof on it, because it was the very top of the hangar. So you could hear what people were saying on the other side. And I remember I caught him one day telling the other IP how impressed he was. Yeah. And that just puffed up my chest. That was it. I was just walking on cloud nine. So, but yeah, that was definitely a defining point in my career to what I said, I'm pretty good at this. So, don't waste it. Don't flounder it. And but I also knew that once you get to that point, it's a long way back down. So, you could fall that quick. So now you've got to do everything great. They're going to expect it. So just keep doing what you're doing.
And so for the non-aviators, so the PC role is you are responsible for that aircraft.
Correct.
So the Army is going to put another person with less experience theoretically in the aircraft, and it's your responsibility for them that point on. So it's a huge responsibility for anyone. Certainly a 20-year-old, right, in Germany,
right,
fresh out of training,
right.
Yeah, so it's that's a big deal.
Now, since you mentioned what really got me afterwards was that the person they put me with as my first co-pilot was a W3 Cobra pilot.
Wow.
Combat experience.
Just transitioned
to the Apache, and he did not want to fly with me. He refused, and they're like, "Okay, you're not going to fly then." Wow. And he finally accepted me, and realized that I was good at what I did, and he could learn something from me. But probably his first 2 months through oral progression, he knew he was the next in line, so he would be my co-pilot, and he did not want any part of it. But
wow.
Yeah.
So did you just win him over with time on the sticks?
Yes. I mean, he knew I could fly the aircraft better than him, but, you know, he had this experience. He had this combat patch, you know, and he was a Cobra guy in Desert Storm, and he had these war stories and things. And I just, you know, I gave him the respect he deserved, but at the same time, I was hard on him in that I knew more than he did.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I knew that I could teach him things. So every chance I got, I would.
Yeah.
And finally he, you know, I don't want to say he caved, but he finally just relented and said, okay, I can learn something from this kid.
Yeah.
You know, and, you know, he could teach me something.
Right.
We could benefit each other.
Yeah, sure.
And it finally came to a mutual agreement in that, look, I can teach you about this Apache and you can teach me about fighting, you know, in combat.
Mm-hmm.
And so we had a good relationship from that point on.
That's interesting. Okay, so one question I get quite often, whether it's from civilians or even people within the military still who've just never really been around aircraft, is in the garrison environment, what is a day like for a warrant officer? You know, and I remember because I went to the advanced course at Fort Benning, and I was the only pilot with 120 infantry officers. And one of them took me at Benning to watch one of the Ranger battalions, see what they were doing during the day. And at 10 in the morning, they were doing combatives.
Right.
And I was thinking, at 10 in the morning, we are not doing combatives on the airfield, right?
Yeah.
So just what's a day in the life, if you're on a day cycle versus a night cycle, what's it like in garrison?
As we talked about with the different tracks that you can be as a warrant officer, but as a line pilot, you have additional duties, or at least you should. And that's another way to stick out. That's something I remember taking on early on in my career. Was I took everything they gave me so I could, you know, at least earn my keep. But so if you have additional duties, you could be the supply warrant, you could be the ComSec guy, you could be the whatever, you know, the pest control guy, you know, I mean, you name it. So normally during the day, you should be taking care of those and making sure those are good to go. You know, you should be bugging the lieutenant to put you on the flight schedule. Yep. Or if you're the very junior warrant, then you should be making sure the fridge is full. You know, so the junior warrant officer should be making sure that, you know, the place is tidy. You know, I'm studying. And that's the big thing is that, you know, as a senior warrant, I used to look around and within a couple of weeks of someone showing up, you can tell, you know, whether they're going to have an easy time or a hard time. Because those ones who I'm looking over who are reading the -10, which is what they should be doing, 5 and 9.
The operations manual.
Right. Preparing for their progression if they haven't started flying, or if they have started flying, preparing for that next flight. That's what they should be doing. That's not always the case. Yep. And again, you can kind of look around and see who your superstars are in a heartbeat.
It's the work ethic, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I've been very lucky in my youngest son, who's at West Point, soon to be a lieutenant, and his fiance, who's an Echo model pilot at Fort Hood. She has been having a hard time as lieutenant, so I've been trying to explain to her exactly what warrant officers should be doing. Yeah. And sometimes they make it look like they're doing what they should be doing, but they're not. And here's how you can tell. So,
and I would even take that maybe a step further with if your job is stocking the fridge, you can even see the guy who's taking pride in how that looks in that area is probably going to carry over to how they treat the aircraft, how hard they're studying. And I think it just progresses from
absolutely.
There, right? So from there, let's jump to 9/11. Kind of curious, where were you when that happened? What was it like for you?
Funny story. My wife still gives me shit about this, but I was at Fort Rucker.
Okay.
And as you had mentioned before, you know, when I was in flight school, Desert Storm kicked off, and I was like, no, you know, I'm going to miss it. So fast forward 11 years, and I'm now at Fort Rucker teaching. I'm out at Hanchy. I was teaching the instructor pilot course for the longbow. And I remember I was on nights that night, and my wife came and woke me up at 7, 8 in the morning and told me to come look. So I ran downstairs, and it was just after the first plane had hit the World Trade Center. And so I'm watching it, and I'm looking at the weather, you know, doing what an aviator does. I'm critiquing everything about why this idiot ran into a freaking building in broad daylight on a beautiful day in New York City. Just then the second airplane hit. And the minute it hit, I took off running to my room and put on my flight suit.
Really?
I'm not kidding you.
Instinctively?
Instinctively. I'm at Fort Rucker.
Yeah.
I'm not going to war.
Far from the...
Yeah, I'm so far away, it's not even funny. I mean, they would have to kill everyone else before they came and got us. But my wife still gives me shit about that because I took off running. I mean, at a full sprint, like I was a fireman and I just heard the bell.
Right.
And I took off running and I wouldn't put on my flight suit, my boots, and I was looking for stuff in my drawer to take with me. And I ran back in and I'm like waiting there, waiting for the phone to ring to say, you know, go, let's go. And then it dawned on me, what are you doing, you idiot? You're a pogue sitting in frickin' Fort Rucker, Alabama, you know, haven't seen TA-50 in, you know, 3 years. I was so mad. I was so mad.
So how long did you spend at Rucker after 9/11 before you rotated out?
1 year. Not even 1 year. That happened in September of 2001, and I PCS'd in May or June of 2002.
Okay.
And lo and behold, I'm going to Korea.
Oh.
I couldn't believe it. I absolutely, but it was the only way I could get out of Fort Rucker. Because the Apache was still, the longbow was still so very new, and we were the first ones to come from Mesa to Rucker to carry the course over, I got stuck. And so I told DA, I said, I will take whatever you have as long as it's to a tactical unit to get out of Fort Rucker. And the branch manager actually had called 8 people before me, and they all said no. And I said, he goes, I need you in Korea in 30 days.
And Korea's 1 year.
Korea's a 1 year
so it's not
unaccompanied tour.
2 or 3 year tour.
No, it's a 1 year tour. And so I took it.
So you're kind of rolling the dice.
I did. I was
I
like,
got to get out of Rucker.
Right.
But
I got something. I'm getting back in the fight.
Mm-hmm.
I'm getting back in the fight. I'm going to go because, and I tell people this today, you know, Fort Rucker will suck all the hua out of you so fast. I just felt, you know, I felt myself just slowly dying there, you know, and I enjoyed teaching. I really did. But I just, you know, I'm a tactical guy. I'm not a traffic pattern everyday guy, which is probably why I picked the career I did after retirement. But so anyway, I took Korea, and then I ended up going there and spending a year. And luckily, the war didn't kick off until the very end of my tour in Korea. Mm-hmm. So I was very, very happy.
Now, some people were going to Afghanistan, right? There was a
3rd of the 101st, my old unit, the first unit I was in at Campbell. They went to RC South. They went all over the country at that time. But yes, they went to Afghanistan in 2001, which was Operation Anaconda.
That's right.
Stanley Pebsworth.
Yep, I remember reading that book.
Yeah, not a good day to die.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Great book. Very interesting at the time. Really took you kind of inside the cockpit. It was looking at the mission itself, but you really got a feel of this is what it would be like in combat,
right?
As an aviator, I feel like.
Yeah, and that was actually more salt in the wound for me because I was a killer spade when I was there as an IP.
Yeah.
And now I see, you know, everybody's going to war but me, and it was those guys who went. It was my old company.
So you had already been to Campbell.
Yes.
Then you went to Rucker.
No,
Korea.
I was at Let me back up. Illisheim.
Yep.
3rd of the 101st. Egypt for a year on a Taft assignment, then Fort Rucker.
Right.
Yeah.
So these same guys, I mean, you knew these.
I knew every one of them.
And I think one thing that's a little bit different maybe with the aviation side of the house, particularly for warrant officers, it seems like you can homestead a little bit more in certain areas as long as, all right, you want to stay at Campbell. Maybe you take a tour in Korea or Rucker, but you come back to Campbell, or you're somebody who likes Fayetteville, you want to stay at Bragg.
That's exactly what people do. They would do 2 years at Campbell, a year in Korea. 2 years at Campbell, a year in Korea. My year was actually in Egypt.
Okay.
So
right.
Yeah.
And so because of that, you know all of these guys.
Oh, wow.
They're in a book written about this, this mission to go get Bin Laden.
Right.
Jeez.
Yeah,
okay.
My old guys, and they're all being heroes, and here I am in Korea.
Looking at the DMZ.
Oh, yeah, flying up and down doing border. Yeah.
Okay, so let's transition now. You're coming out of Korea, and just looking at your deployment cycle overall. 4 deployments, 2 to Iraq, 2 to Afghanistan.
Correct.
Is that right? What are the years for those?
I showed up to Operation Iraqi Freedom about 4 or 5 months into the war, October of 2003. and me and Nick Caudle showed up at the same time together, maintenance pilot. And we flew in on a C-130 in 2003, stayed there throughout, came back in April of 2004.
Okay. And
then redeployed 14 months later back to Iraq.
And where were you the first time and the second time?
The first time we were everywhere. We were at Kuwari West, Q West. Mm-hmm. We were at Mosul. We were in not Spiker, but what was the name of it back then? Taji. Mm-hmm. It was Spiker, but we called it Samara. It wasn't an official fob at that point because we were basically all collapsing down to get out of there because we thought that was it. We thought we would never go back.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah, we were, everything we didn't want to bring home, we were burning it in huge pits. And I mean, we just thought this was it. We're never coming back. And then, so after we returned, we're going back again in 14 months. So that was 05, 06. Okay. And from there, we pretty much stayed at Camp Spiker, except for one company went to Talifar. Okay. And that's actually where the headquarters company went, Colonel Gabram and Greg Turbeville. Mm-hmm. Colonel Gabram was the battalion commander. Greg Turbeville was the battalion SP. They had a contingent up there of with Blackhawks and 58s. It was pretty much the first task force model that we'd done at that point. So they were all there, and then we were down at Camp Spiker the whole time. And again, that was a one-year tour. And we did some work down in Taji, Anaconda, Muqaddiya, all over northern Baghdad area. Okay. We had to take that over our last 3 months in country because the National Guard unit who showed up couldn't do it because they weren't trained. So our last 3 months was like probably the worst 3 months. Okay. So it was brutal.
And then you probably had a 2-year gap, and then
had 15 months.
15 months.
Yeah, the longest gap I had between all 4 deployments was 15 months.
All right.
So I had a 15-month break, and then during this time was when I moved from company SP to the battalion SP. Mm-hmm. And we knew we were going to Afghanistan. We knew we were getting the MTADs, so we had to recreate the wheel. We started doing a lot of high-altitude training. We had to get everybody up to speed on MTADs for the new modernized TADs.
So that's kind of your optics as you're looking at a target set in front of you.
Absolutely.
The MTADs is the next generation model.
Next generation FLIR, which was long overdue. But with it, again, because we could see now, we had to change it the way we did everything. Mm-hmm. We had to change the altitudes that we were going to fly. We had to change in the teams that we were going to do. We were deploying in a full task force model, which had never really been done in a true fashion up until that point. So everything was, again, evolving and changing. So we did Afghanistan we had 3 companies split 3 ways, actually 4 ways. We had half a company at Bagram, the other half was at Jabad, a company at Salerno, and a company at Kandahar. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, we being down at Salerno with the headquarters company, mm-hmm. With the Bearcats. So.
And then 14 months later?
14 months later, I was back in Afghanistan, and this time in RC South. Okay. At that point, first was RC East, RC North, and that one group in South. This time we had 3 battalions who were in theater, so we took RC South. Wow. And we had, again, split 3 ways in the task force model. We were at Tarin Count, just north of Kandahar. We had one company at Kandahar who worked with Task Force 310, and then we had another company over at Wolverine, which was just east of Kandahar. Mm-hmm. And we operated in that general area for the entire year. Okay. That was my last deployment.
So let me ask you this. Aviation in particular is just inherently dangerous, particularly with rotary wing. You don't even have to be in a mission in combat to see the effects of that. Right? So was there a point, maybe it was at Illisheim, and maybe it was during your first deployment, but was there a point where you really said, this is for real? This job could get me killed when I'm doing this. Was it a gunnery somewhere, or did you just know it from the beginning?
I think probably during flight school. I remember one incident that just scared the shit out of me. I'd never been scared like that before. You've had close calls when you're in high school, driving a car or a motorcycle or something stupid like that, but we were doing traffic patterns, and we had Chinooks on 2 lanes, and we had Cobras on the other doing NVGs. And, of course, the guys who were on lanes 2 and 3 were going towards each other. And I remember one night, I'm fat, dumb, and happy doing what a pilot does, a student pilot, and at the last second, the IP took the controls and screamed bloody murder and just complete wing over upside down right there in the traffic pattern.
Wow.
And I had no idea what was going on initially until I look up and left, and I remember I could see the Chinook pilot's goggles. Wow. It was just that close. Yeah. And, you know, so I was behind the power curve on what was going on. And then I remember we got to the ground, and my IP was a Vietnam vet, hardcore guy, tons and tons of kills in Vietnam, hardest man I ever knew while I was in flight school. And I remember when we got out, he was visibly shaken. Wow. Anger and fear both, but I remember that really got my attention as a young kid going through flight school, that how serious this was, and that in just a blink of an eye, we could have just been dead here at Fort Rucker. And so I remember that, you know, and that probably was the point at which I knew this was for real. This was, you cannot let up. You cannot, you know, and you have to compartmentalize. You have to separate everything else from what you're doing to what you're doing in that cockpit. Right. That's
exactly.
It. You know, and some people can do it. Some people can't. Some people are okay at it. Some people are great at it. And you know, through my years of being an instructor pilot, you can usually pick up on who those are. You know, in tight situations, usually in night flying is when you can really pick up on it and who can focus and just focus, you know, completely focus. Not just they're pretty good and they kind of make do, but guys who are completely in the zone, you know, and they're not seeing anything except what it is they're doing.
Right. So actually, I wanted to talk about that in some of the instances when you and I flew together. Because whether we were in the same cockpit or in separate aircraft just as wingmen on a particular operation, I remember feeling like I know what I'm doing, but JT is probably 3 steps ahead of me in this. His ability to see what's going to happen next was almost like playing chess. And for me, I'm a little bit different in that I'm trying to run the battle on the ground.
Sure.
But I remember in some of our operations where you were putting rounds on targets before I could even get a sense of where the bad guys were at that time.
Right.
And so I was really curious how you managed. Was that something you developed over time? Because I was there for your 3rd deployment. So how did you do that? Because I mean, you had 3 kids at the time to think about, right? Back home, a wife, a whole other life here, and you're on another deployment. What was your technique? How did you do it?
It developed over time, but I think something that, and again, everyone, their personality plays a lot into it, but even as a kid, I could focus, I could block things out. Like you talked about my wife, my kids, they never entered my mind in the cockpit. Never. And that sounds callous. That sounds, you know, but I just remember, and I picked this habit up at flight school, was that, and this is going to sound corny, but do you remember the baseball movie with Kevin Costner? Where,
I know it exactly.
Yeah.
He pitches a 9-inning game.
Yeah, where he says, engage the mechanism.
Yeah.
And I know it sounds corny, but to me, that was closing the canopy. The minute I close the canopy and it goes, that's it.
I remember that because they kind of show him on the mound.
Right.
And he's in a stadium, lights are on him, and then all of a sudden everything is kind of silent behind him. And that's the pitcher zoning in. Yeah. Blocking everything out.
That's the only thing I can equate it to, is that, and my wife used to ask me all the time the same thing, you know, how do you not think about this or think about that? And I was like, I just don't. Yeah. It never enters my mind. You know, I think about it 10 or 15 minutes after I get out of the cockpit, after I come down, but I just don't. But I think that, again, you develop it better, again, with more experience. And like you said, you know, at that point in my career, I was probably at the absolute top of my game. I could fly the aircraft without thinking about it. Yeah. So, you know, flying with other people who were less experienced than me, you know, they still had to worry some about flying the airplane. Well, I didn't have to worry about that anymore. So that allowed me to focus more outside. That allowed me more to hear what's going on and visualize in my head where everything is, and then what are going to be, what's the next thing, what's the next thing, what's the next thing, because I tried to always put things, and I used to put it in Ks, but I'd always put everything at, at 90 knots, you're basically going, 3 Ks a minute. So my thing was that in a minute I'm going 3 Ks, so I've got to keep things faster. I've got to, I've got to, and I think that was bred into me as a W1 because of all the navigating specialties that we had. We had to be so good at it for that
Cold War fight.
Absolutely.
Because the timing of aircraft coming and taking out radars,
everything had to be on it. Yeah, and you had a very archaic Doppler that didn't work half the time, and you had a 1/100 map. So you had to be ahead of yourself. And I just remember that always. Everything I did in the cockpit, I was always on the third page from now, just trying to get, that way, okay, I'm there. I've already gone through here in my head, so now I can keep going and just keep going. And but like I said, I had a lot more flight time than most people at that point, a lot more experience, so I could focus more on that than flying the airplane. Flying the airplane just came naturally to me. So, and it was part of me, so I didn't have to worry about it. So it allowed me to focus more, I think, and be more observant on everything going on through my ears, through the headset, through all the radios, and then at the same time being able to hear or anticipate what my wingman's going to do and know where I need to be, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And so it brings to mind, there's this fantastic book called No Easy Day. It's written by one of the SEALs who was in the stack to go in and get bin Laden.
Right.
And one of the fascinating parts of that book is talking about, he was in the SEALs from 9/11 until he got out after the bin Laden raid. And he talks about his experience in Iraq, I think in 2005, 2006, and how poorly executed some of their missions were, even for our most elite.
Right.
And then by 2011, he was saying, 2010, 2011, they were just operating on another level.
Right.
They had just learned how to operate in this model so well, so efficiently, 3 deployments at that point.
Right.
So I'm sure that's similar model you were operating off of. So one of the things I wanted to talk about is we've touched on some of these milestones we have as aviators. So your first flight, your first solo flight, pilot in command. What was your first flight in combat like? So I'm assuming it's 2003, is that right?
2003.
Daytime, nighttime, what was that like?
It was a daytime flight in Samara. I had actually, right after I'd gotten there, I was with Alpha Company, first of the 101st. I was their new company SP, but I needed to get up to speed. So I took an instrument flight and just a roundabout traffic pattern to make sure, yes, I can fly. So I don't really count those. But the first combat mission I did was actually with another company. Alpha Company wasn't doing much, and they were very stagnant at that point. They just wanted to go home. But I heard Charlie Company was down at Samara supporting 4th ID, and they were flying over Samara, and it sucked, and it was horrible, and everybody was like, even 4ID didn't want to fly in Samara. So I was like, hey, can I go down there? And they're like, sure, knock yourself out. So I did. I jumped on a Black Hawk, and I went down there, and my first combat flight was actually in Samara with Charlie Company.
But still flying for the 101st, supporting 4th ID, you just went and flew for a different company.
Yes.
And you stay there for a week, a month?
I stayed there for 3 months.
Okay.
18 of us living in one place, no shower, no bathroom, but I loved it.
Yeah.
I loved it. We were flying downtown Samara, buildings on either side. The guys on the ground, the M1 units were smashing through buildings. We were shooting
M1s being
people.
tanks.
Yes.
Right? So you're actually working with tanks.
Oh, yeah.
Kind of the way it was almost designed at one point. Not maybe in a city, but supporting tanks with this kind of armored helicopter.
Yeah.
So your first flight, daytime. You're out in Samara.
Yep, down in Samara.
What's going on in your mind? This is your first time in combat. You probably have how many hours at that time?
I probably had maybe 3,000 hours at that point.
Holy cow. All right.
But yeah, a little nervous, anxious. But I just remembered telling myself when I got in, just fly the airplane. just fly the airplane. Everything else will take care of itself. Because it wasn't very kinetic. It was very sporadic in different pockets. So, you know, I just said I wasn't the air mission commander because I was new. I remember it was a guy by the name of Dave. I can't remember his last name. Maintenance pilot, great guy, good tactical maintenance pilot. So I remember I flew. He was my wingman. So I basically, you know, he was the air mission commander for our flight of 2 aircraft, and I just remember thinking, just fly the aircraft, keep it in trim, and make sure you're oriented on the target, and you know, keep your head on a swivel. And that was it. It was fun. I mean, like I said, nothing happened. We didn't shoot anybody. No engagement that day.
But you must have been on edge, thinking any moment, right?
I was up until about the 3rd hour, you know, and because we'd do a bag of gas and we'd go back out and we'd do another recon and just in different areas that 4ID wanted us to check. So it was pretty uneventful. Like I said, a little nervous, but mainly just anxious. Just wanted to get out there and actually log combat time.
Right.
You know.
Finally, right. So you kind of have that experience.
Yeah.
So in that case, let's talk about the first time you had to pull the trigger, right? Which I think is another milestone in at least the attack side of the house. And personally, I don't even know if I can remember that first time for me. I'm curious, what was it like for you that first time? Where were you?
I was in Samara, and the only reason I can remember it is because of who I was supposed to be with and what airplane I was in. I was supposed to be flying with Tyler Cody, General Cody's youngest son. I'd been flying with him a lot up to that point. He was a platoon leader in Charlie Company.
The Codys are kind of like royalty within Army aviation.
Yes. First shot of Desert Storm.
First shot of Desert Storm, the most senior ranking aviation officer, I think.
To hold the Vice Chief of Staff position, yes.
And 2 sons, both in the Army, both excellent pilots.
One's a battalion
both great
commander
people.
Right now in Korea, yeah.
I took command from Clint Cody,
Right.
His son. So fantastic family anyway.
Yes. So anyway, I was supposed to fly with Tyler that day, but we had another platoon leader who wasn't getting a lot of flight time. Who was a staff aviator, Jackson Salter. So he gave up his seat that day. And it had been fairly quiet. There had been a couple of people who had engagements on other, in other shifts. But anyway, we got to Samara daytime. I was in Rigor Mortis. Rigor Mortis is the aircraft that fired the first shot of Desert Storm.
Is that right?
Yes. It has a placard in the back of it that says, Commander Cody fired the first shots from Desert Storm in this aircraft, whatever, December 1991, whatever date it was. Yeah. So, that's why I remember it.
So
and
why is it called Rigor Mortis?
That was just the name of the aircraft. It had issues all the time. It's like it had rigor mortis.
Okay.
It was kind of a hangar queen, but that was Dick Cody's bird during Desert Storm that fired the first shot.
Okay.
So anyway, I was in that bird with Jackson Salter, and they had found an IED maker who was right on the river on the west side of Samara, who was held up and was taking pop shots at people, and they asked us if we could engage it. So we did, and I remember. It felt like I was trying to put on my underwear backwards.
Really?
We didn't, and even the crew I was with who had been there 4 months longer than me, we just didn't know how to set up to do this.
We might need to talk about that for a sec, because when you're in gunnery before that, you're coming up on a line at a stationary hover and taking a shot at these massive targets that are usually tank holes out in the distance. Now you're in a more dynamic environment,
right? And
you're shooting on the move.
Well, that's what we didn't know. I mean, we were like, do we do this from hovering? Do we do this on the move? We had determined that we were going to engage it from north to south, and we were going to make right breaks. But we had a huge power line there just on that right break, and to the left of us was all of Samara. So we were kind of channelized into this area, and we just didn't have a good shot. And so really the only thing we could do was come to a hover. And then I remember thinking, what are we doing? There's been airplanes shot down over here for coming to a hover. But it was kind of the only option we had.
And you had the power to do it.
We did.
Right?
We did.
So.
We had the power to do it. But I just remember thinking, man, we're just hanging it out right now. And it just, like I said, it just felt so unnatural. And I just wanted to get those rounds off. I knew we were going to hit it. It's broad daylight. It's right there. So I just wanted to get those rounds off, and so they could go in and go, yeah, you got him. And we did. And you know, they did. So
what did you fire?
We fired 30 millimeter and rockets.
Okay. From a hover.
From a hover.
And at that time, how far out are you?
We were probably 1,500 meters.
And was it suppressive fire to allow a ground unit to get in, or were you trying to take
No,
down
we were
the
trying to
building?
take the building down with him in it because he was held up there, and they didn't want to risk any ground guys going in there to try and get him. So they were like, neutralize the target, just destroy it.
How close were the friendlies to that target?
They were right on the ridge above it, probably within 500 meters.
That's
Slant distance.
okay.
Slant range.
And that's so you kind of have them off.
Yeah, they're on the left.
Looking off to the side.
Armchair quarterbacking over there on the ridge. And, you know, here we are at a hover hanging it out. And, like I said, daytime, easy shot. But it just felt like something, like I said, it felt like I had my shoes on the wrong feet. Yeah, it just was completely unnatural. It wasn't fluid.
Any hesitation? Not for the shot itself, but the idea, all right, I'm about to shoot at a person.
No,
for the first time.
The minute we got the call from the approval from the ground forces, that was it. Locked in, ready. That's it.
And so when you're done with that, you're kind of flying back. I would imagine. I think I recall this thinking, all right, all this stuff I've trained for, I've now executed. What was going through your head coming back from that?
I was proud. Glad that we'd finally pulled the trigger. We did get the bad guy. No ground forces were injured.
Probably saved somebody from going in and
Absolutely.
taking a shot.
I thought that was a good call by the ground force commander. Good shots by us. Again, it was a softball pitch for us, which I'm glad. I mean, the first one was a softball pitch.
Yeah.
So, you know, just maybe that's why it felt unnatural, was that it was too easy. And it felt like it should be harder than this.
Yeah.
And maybe that's why I felt the way I did at the time. But no, on the way back, I was complimenting the front seater on doing a good job. The wingman was doing the same. We were getting a rounds count from each other. And we were actually in a hurry to get back because the colonel wanted to borrow our bird so he could go stand in Saddam's hole and take a picture.
Okay.
So, yeah.
So let's go from what you're describing as like the softball changeup target to maybe the fastball slider version.
Right.
Kind of what was some of as you think back on those 4 deployments, what was the toughest deployment you had? And then let's get into one of those engagements that really tested you.
Probably our deployment to Salerno was the toughest. It was many things. It was the most enjoyable. It was the most gratifying. It was the scariest.
Flying with me will do that. Yep.
No.
Agreed.
No, it was just, I think the weight of it on me. It was my first time as a battalion SP. I felt
Huge
like
deal.
Huge responsibility as the senior pilot in the battalion, and I just felt this huge responsibility, and I wanted to do a good job. And my only goal, get everyone home. That was it. Number one. Anything above and beyond that's gravy, but like I said, probably there's not one engagement that stands out that was the hardest or the toughest. Some of them, the Jarez Valley incident that we had with the ground force commander was probably one of the more troubling, I think, for me, even today. But
do you mind talking about that? I mean, I remember that distinctly,
no.
And that was one of the moments I recall thinking, JT is so far ahead of this fight in the cockpit, and I'm just struggling to keep up. And I had Sean Breath in the cockpit with me, and he was, I felt, maybe 2 steps ahead, right up there with you. You guys were both putting rounds down in a really chaotic situation.
Right.
So in that case, I would like to talk as we're getting into that particular situation. We've got these towering mountains on both sides. What was going through your head for this type of engagement?
I think that entire day, it caught us by surprise. The very first time we escorted those Chinooks in there, and there were RPG airbursts everywhere, I remember thinking, wow, we did not get a good threat brief for this. I remember thinking, because they made it sound like it was going to be an admin mission. There was going to be a money drop. There's just some ground guys. You're going to escort these Chinooks. They're going to get some guys. They're going to take them back to airborne. And then you may do one more turn, and then that's going to be it. And then as we went in, like you said, with the hills on both sides, and we went in behind them initially, I just remember thinking, oh my God, this is, and then it starts ticking. I'm like, okay, we are now behind the power curve. We need to get ahead of this real quick. So, start thinking. So, yeah, we were behind the power curve. And I remember talking with Adam Merrick, who was in my front seat, and maybe with you guys on the radio, and even the guys in the Chinook. I remember we got in and they got down, and then we're kind of circling, we're off kilter. Well, this isn't what we were briefed. This isn't what we planned to do. This is something is not right.
And the plan here was to go into pretty uncharted area. We had dropped off an infantry unit there previously, escorted them into this valley. They established a presence there for maybe a week or two.
Right.
Then we went in to pull them out both by air with the Chinooks and then ground escort a convoy out one road in the middle of this valley pass. Probably very characteristic for anyone who's served in Afghanistan. You've got one traversable lane to use and a lot of ground on both sides that kind of looks down on this area. And what was going to be a 2.5 hour bag of gas turned into, I feel like, a 10-hour gunfight, right?
Yes,
so from
absolutely. So yeah, again, we got in, it just didn't feel right. So I started formulating a plan and kind of bouncing things off Adam, and we get back to airborne, and we had landed. We had to have landed because I remember discussing with him. I was like, look, we can't go in there again without something. We can't see them. It was, lots of foliage, lots of palm groves. So I said, Adam, are you okay if we get between where we think the bad guys are and the Chinooks? And he goes, I was like, I know that sounds kind of crazy. I was like, but if they hit us, at least they take out 2 and not 8 or 40. And he goes, yeah, okay. Because I just couldn't think of another way to support them because of the rising terrain on both sides. I figured if we both came in parallel and we got between them, it would either deter them from shooting at us, or if they did shoot, and the magic bullet hit, it would just take us down and then the Chinook could go back. So we discussed it on the radio, and we said, yeah, that's what we're going to do. And we told the Chinook crews that's what we're going to do. And it's the only time I've ever been scared in the cockpit.
Is that right? Wow.
That right then, that moment. And my body was telling me this. My left leg started shaking so bad I couldn't stop it.
Never happened before.
Never happened before.
Or since, maybe?
No.
Wow.
Never happened before. I'd never, and I remember getting mad because I realized what it was. It was adrenaline, but it was adrenaline because I was scared.
Yeah.
And that made me mad. I was so mad.
Interesting.
I'm just like, stop. So we took off. We put ourselves between the Chinooks and the bad guys. Luckily, I don't remember taking a lot of fire, maybe an airburst or two, but nothing that got our attention. But I remember halfway down there, I was like, so, Adam, how's it feel to be a human shield? Trying to break up, trying to just...
And that's important, though, right?
Oh, absolutely. I wanted to get... Because I could tell... Because Adam wasn't talking to me like he normally was. And I knew... I was like, if my leg's shaking and I'm nervous, I know he is too, So
Adam Merrick,
yes.
Fantastic pilot. One of those guys who you could see takes pride in everything he does, was great on the sticks, and was in his first deployment as well, I think.
Yes, that was his first deployment.
So he's there with the battalion SP in his back seat in this firefight, and the first time the battalion SP has gone through this type of fear factor. So
right. So yeah, I just wanted to kind of loosen, lighten it up a little bit, stay focused. So we went in and we, the Chinooks did get to ground and got those guys out, and they were pulling back, and then the ground convoy started to leave. And we were scanning all over. We just didn't know where to look. It was palm groves everywhere. You couldn't see anything. Adam would see kind of somebody run through the woods, or, you just see just a blur here and there. And then as we're scanning and flying and at least trying to give a presence over that is when the call came. One of the gunners in the Humvees had taken an RPG right in the face right at that overpass. And huge firefight was going on. The radio was going nuts. And I remember that poor driver is just screaming bloody murder, you know, screaming bloody murder. And I just wanted him to shut up. I just needed him to stop talking. And I got mad. I got so mad. I got mad at everything all at once. And then I remember yelling at Adam, which I never yelled at anybody. No. I remember yelling at Adam. I was like, find a fucking target and start shooting it right now.
Yep.
And he wasn't. He couldn't, you know, of course, I'm doing this. Yep. And at the same time, I could hear you guys, something's going on with you. You know, you guys are taking fire or you're seeing something. And then finally I told Adam, I was like, I've got the gun. And I saw, you know, dudes over here running away from that area. And I just started spraying it. And I just, you know, and I remember flying the airplane like a madman. And I was just so furious, but I was able to hear you guys going. So I heard we did that, and then we were trying to get the ground guys out of the convoy, out of the thing at the same time. So what I did was that as I was laying suppressive fire, I told Adam to find a place to put the Black Hawk, to get a medevac, get a grid. He did that because he basically was unable to find targets with the TADs at that point. It was too dynamic. It was impossible. His field of view would have been too zoomed in. He didn't, you know, we were too right on the trees. We're trying to give a presence. We're not trying to back off and get standoff at that point. And then I heard you guys having problems taking fire. So I'm still trying to get him to do that. I'd circle back around to where you guys are, and I'm telling you to get out of there, get out of there. I'm trying to find out where you're taking fire from. Adam's getting a grid to the convoy commander. We finally get them out of the kill zone. I'm talking to Colonel Scott and the Black Hawk, and just as all of this is going on, and I'm starting to get 3 ahead again. Fucking F-15 comes flying through the valley, popping flares as a show of force. And
what altitude do you think above the ground?
Maybe a couple hundred feet above us.
That's right.
So maybe 700 feet at the most. And I just remember looking out. I remember I was
coordination.
None. I remember in a left turn, and I look over and I heard it, and then I saw it. And I was so furious. I got on the radio, and I was like, get that fucking F-15 out of here. Because at that point now, I've got one more thing to worry about.
That's right.
You know, and I just wanted that to be going. You're not doing anything. You're hurting me right now. You're not helping me. Get out of here.
So you got an enemy you can't see on the ground. It's broad daylight. A guy takes an RPG to the chest, and I know in my mind I was thinking, the guys on the ground just think we can do anything. And we've let them down because this guy took a hit in broad daylight. Yeah. Right. So now it's backpedaling. What are we going to do next? We got to get him out of the kill zone. You've got 2 Apaches there. We have another team of Apaches waiting to relieve us, kind of cycling on and off so we could go refuel and rearm. You've got Chinooks doing turns, Black Hawk with the battalion commander orchestrating the fight. Then an F-15 comes in. And in the Apache, I mean, you might just talk about the radios. We have several radios running at any time, right? So who are you talking to?
We're talking to each other. I think at that time we were talking to each other on a single-channel Fox. We had that in a UHF as a backup. Because we were on CTAP on Victor, because I remember that's where I heard her from, the F-15 pilot. And then we were talking to, again, the ground forces on the other Fox Mike radio. So we've got all that going on, and we were using ABN on uniform and still talking to each other on it, talking to all the aircraft on ABN on uniform throughout the Chinooks, the Apaches, and the Blackhawks, talking to each other on Fox, hearing the F-15 on Victor, all at once, and then that poor ground guy, screaming bloody murder that his buddy's dead, he's dead, the whole time on Fox, all the way out of the kill zone. So it was a lot going on.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, you kind of talked to Adam about this, of putting yourself in between the Chinook and the bad guys. Not only that, though, I remember you and Sean talking earlier and saying, we just got to go down and draw fire away from the convoy so they can get out. Yep. And we took several rounds in the aircraft at that point, I remember, because when we landed, it was just leaking out of holes that should not have been there, that I recall. So I think we had to get an extension for our flight hours that day.
We did, yeah.
Right, so we had to go beyond maybe 8 hours. We had to have approval from a general level officer? Had it been delegated down?
I think so. I had the delegated. I think the brigade commander had to get approval from a general at that point to get us back.
And so we escort these guys out, and kind of common on the aviation side, we're never going to meet these guys on the ground, right? I always felt that was really tough. Maybe in Iraq it was different?
No, it was the same. And Iraq, I think, probably worse off because there were many convoy escorts in Iraq. I remember one specifically that we did our best to clear the route, and this Humvee got hit. And I remember the guy on the other side trying to get the driver out, and he reached in and grabbed him, and when he pulled him out, it was just his torso.
Oh, you were watching it.
Yeah, I was the guy. I was the guy who was supposed to clear these routes. And I mean, but you just can't see underground. But we never met those guys. We never got to see those guys. And so there was a disconnect with that. I mean, we knew each other on the radios.
Yep.
But we never really got face to face like we do with the special operators, where we actually did
planning the missions together.
Absolutely.
Debriefing afterwards,
right?
That sort of thing.
Yeah, the second Afghanistan was like that because we did a lot of special operations with the Australian SAS. So it was awesome. The Task Force 66 guys. We worked with them. We lived with them on the same compound. So a little bit better.
Yeah. So as you're looking at, if we could go back to what you just mentioned in Iraq with that convoy incident, you're watching this guy pull the torso out. I feel like I never once flying with you or even talking to someone else heard somebody say, JT's not in this. Like your head was always in, you were zoned in. How do you put something like that behind you? Like right after you see it in the flight and then going into your next flight, right? I feel like that's kind of
I think my initial feeling is anger, and you harness it, you use it. Anger is a very powerful emotion, but I think if you can use it as motivation, if you can use it to focus, if you can use it to say, don't let it run your other emotions, fear, feeling sorry for them, being upset, being sad. It's natural to do all of those types of things, but they're not beneficial to you in the cockpit. Where anger can be used, if you can harness it, if you know what to do with it, if you could take that and go, again, it's a tool, but it's only good if you know how to use it. It can kill you. A good friend of mine, Keith Yoakum, was killed because of it. Yeah. He let it drive him to a point of where he couldn't recover. But if you can use it to benefit yourself, and I think it comes with practice. I used to always tell, and guys used to give me a lot of shit about our videos and our tapes, in that, it's not that I enjoyed it. It sounded like I enjoy it, but it was just that I'm caging it. I let it out, but it's focused. It's not sporadic. It's not just blah everywhere.
They were giving you shit about what you say on the tape. Is that what you're saying?
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. It's not that like, woo, look at that guy.
No.
It's you can hear me, talking on the radio, keeping him in sight, keeping him in focus, telling him to engage.
Yeah, you're talking through everything.
Absolutely,
right? Yeah.
I'm talking everyone through what's going on, but at the same time, I'm harnessing this emotion to help me, not hurt me.
Yep. So it's not destructive in that.
No,
nature.
It's not destructive to me. It's destructive, and that's probably the way to look at it, is that I'm using it to destroy the enemy. I'm not using it to make myself mad.
Right.
Being mad doesn't help me. But initially, like you said, seeing that guy and then being able to focus, because I remember right after that happened, I wanted to do another turn. I wanted to do another bag. I wanted to go out there and look at that road 10 million times.
Yeah.
And I just used it to do that.
Right.
But it never went outside of that. The other things outside the cockpit couldn't get through the plexiglass.
Yeah. And so after Jalrez, after that convoy incident, or some of these others, and you alluded to it earlier, kind of you're in the zone, but then 10 to 15 minutes after you land, you kind of come down.
I do.
What was that like for you? Because I feel like it doesn't matter what type of combat environment you're in. You're a pilot. You're a door kicker. You probably have your own mechanism. What was it like for JT?
Yeah, my mechanism was self-critique.
Yeah.
I would first start with myself. I'd look at the mission. Here's what we wanted to do. Here's what we did. and then work my way down from, okay, here were our goals. How could we have done this, that, or the other better? And more self-critique than anything. I know a lot of people thought I was hard on them, or I would give them crap about how they did things, but if they could hear myself in my head, I mean, they would have thought I was...
They were getting off easy.
They were getting off pretty easy.
Yeah.
And I think just because the responsibility, the responsibility of making sure that everyone's looking at you. If you screw this up, then where does that put us? Where does that put this battalion? But that only comes to me after the fact. I don't think about it while I'm in the cockpit. I think about it after the fact, and I go, okay, how can I do that better? How could we have done that better? The first 15 minutes, you're still pretty high on adrenaline, and you're pretty happy, and you're high-fiving each other if it was a great mission. But then after that, it's just self-reflection.
Did you kind of just go into your chew or whatever and just sit there on your own, or did you want to be back with some of the other pilots talking it out? What was your mechanism? Besides, where did you go to get that self-reflection? You hit the treadmill. I remember you worked out a lot.
Yeah.
How'd you do it?
The gym was a big help for that. The gym was probably sometimes I would go to my room, depending on what the shift was, if it was middle of the day or super late at night. But normally in the gym, I like to, I always told my wife how my schedule went. If you ran a 12-hour shift, you're really on for 14, so you had to make a decision. Do I watch 1 hour of Deadwood, or do I go to the gym?
Yeah.
So my thing was that, and sometimes, in my chew, just sitting there, and I like to write things down. I like to visualize things, so that I would go through the mission with my knee board and just kind of look at, because I'd make little notes to myself as I'm going through, and maybe it was a frequency, or maybe it was a grid, or trying to go through that in my head and then go, okay, well, next time we go through there, especially doing reconnaissance, I think that really paid dividends for me, because when I would fly with usually someone new every time, I usually flew with a captain from the 3 shop, and so I would be able to show them this information and go, hey, last time we were here, I saw this, this, and this, so I think we should probably look in here or look over there or orient our sensors in this direction. So that's kind of what I did.
Yep.
But nothing, nothing life-changing. Nothing. No. That
was just kind of your method.
It was
over those deployments.
It was.
Was there any gear you always wanted to have with you beyond what you were issued? It was, hey, when I get in the cockpit, I gotta have this here.
I had my good luck charm.
Can you share what that was?
Sure. I had 2. One was a half-broken Budweiser bottle opener that I had been given by my very first boss when I was 16 years old. He owned a bar right down the road from where we lived, and he let me, he would buy beer in singles, and I'd have to, put it in 6-packs and those types of things. And I don't even know how it ended up on my helmet bag in Germany, and I just kept it there.
Wow. So not even like your first deployment. You had it from the beginning. I had this
from the very beginning of my flight career.
Yeah.
So that one thing, and on my deployments, it was a St. Michael card. I'm not religious in any way, shape, form, or fashion, but I was given that by a chaplain, and I stuffed it in my knee board. And it just stayed there. And my son actually carried it with him to Mosul on his last deployment.
Jeez.
And he carried the same flag that I had folded in my go bag for all 4 deployments. He carried that also.
American flag.
American flag, yeah. I've still got it. Actually, if you went in that room right now, you'd see my go bag from Afghanistan, and they're both still in there.
Really?
Yeah.
So this might be the perfect time to transition to talk about that other part of your life, which is you stepping out of the cockpit and then your own son deploying to the very area you deployed to.
Yes.
And I would just say, I remember very well, I think you posted this on Facebook and you said, hey guys, I'm not going to be there. My son is going in on the ground. Any pilots out there, please look out for these guys.
Right.
I remember reading that and telling my wife, look at this. This is crazy. The same war. We've been there so long.
Yeah.
Right. So, how was that? He went to Mosul, I think you said.
He did. He went to Mosul with 2nd BCT. He was on the ground. It was surreal. He'd only gone through AIT as an 11 Bravo, and he had, maybe 3 months of training before he went. So, of course, as a father, I'm, scared to death. But he's hyper aggressive, very smart, smarter than anybody I know academically. Focused. He's a lot like me in that he can throw things out and focus on what's important. But my biggest fear was I didn't want him to do something stupid to try and prove himself.
Yeah.
Don't try to outdo the old man. Don't try to be a hero. That was my biggest fear. I was like, it'll come. It will come. You don't force it. Let it come to you.
Let me ask you this. So, as you know, I have 3 sons, and I'm sure one day I'm going to be looking down the same barrel, if you will.
I hope not.
Well, I know. So, was there a conversation you had with him before he went, when it was just you two talking?
Oh, absolutely. Many nights.
Oh, several of them.
Oh, absolutely. He lived with us before he went.
Wow.
Even though we had a barracks room, he stayed here, of course.
So what would you talk to him about?
I just explained a lot of the same experiences that we just talked about. Here's what it feels like. Here are cues that you need to be able to see. You need to be able to pick up on. You need to be able to focus. Know what's not important. We always focus on what's important, but you also need to know what's not important. Otherwise, you don't know what important is.
So really learning what that environment's like.
Absolutely. So, I told him, in the moment, you focus on the task at hand, but don't ever be behind the power curve. If you find yourself behind the power curve, you do everything you can to get ahead of it right now. And if you do that, those things that lead you there will make you successful. It may be just because I feel behind the power curve, I need to get ahead of it. No. By doing that, you've helped yourself in 2 ways. Now I'm ahead of the power curve, and everything you did up to that point was probably something you needed to do anyway. Yeah. But sometimes we try to. You hear people say, "Oh, everything just slows down." I don't. That doesn't.
I don't remember that either.
No, it doesn't happen that way. I don't remember anything slowing down. It didn't seem like time just stood still. I don't believe that at all. I mean, it's kinetic. It's going, but. I think if time slows down, you've stopped, and that's wrong. Yeah. You don't. If things are still going like this, that's good. As long as you are going where you need to go.
Right.
But anyway, I told him just focus on what's important. Focus on, keeping your buddy safe. Focus on, don't take anything for granted. And, of course, he was embedded with an Iraqi brigade, so that worried me. Yeah. I was like, keep them in front of you. They will befriend you. They will, I've been around the Iraqis, the Afghanis we worked with a lot. In Egypt with my experience in working with the Egyptians. I was like, look, they'll be your friend, you'll think they're good to go, and the next thing you know, you're taking one in the back of the head. So, don't trust anyone. They're not your friends, you're never going to see them again, So that worried me. But really, the big thing was just focus on what's important, keep your buddy safe, keep yourself safe, stay focused, don't be a hero.
Did you find yourself really trying to not watch the news?
Oh, yeah.
Keep up on that? I mean, you were really reversed from this role that your family had experienced 4 times.
I gained the utmost respect for my wife because now I know how it felt. And so, yes, and like you said, I had some buddies downrange. I had Pete Zavitz was a 64 SP who was with 10th Mountain, who had run into Chase a couple of times at their little makeshift barber shop or wherever they were in Erbil. I had a few other guys that were all there, so I could kind of keep tabs on him in that way. And but yeah, it was. I'm not a big news watcher anyway. Most of my news is either via the internet or just reading an article, picking and choosing. So. The TV news didn't bother me, but, and of course, still being LinkedIn on post, that really helped.
Running the AVCAT,
absolutely.
Right?
Still being LinkedIn, so I knew what was going on.
Wow. So you have another son who is following even closer in your footsteps.
Yes.
Right? Can you kind of talk about where he is now in the process?
Sure. My oldest son, Brent, he is a W-1 who is supposedly taking his bag check ride today. bag being the night phase of the 64 course, where they're completely blacked out in the back seat, and all you can see through is a 1-inch by 1-inch cathode ray tube mounted to your right eye. It's the toughest phase of the Apache of the longbow course.
Yeah.
So yes, he is. He's going through that right now.
God help him.
Yes, God help him. He catches a lot of shit because of who his old man is.
As he should.
As he should. But hopefully he'll finish in November, and then he'll be deploying to Afghanistan in June.
Okay. And then one question as we kind of wrap up here. As you look back on this career you've had, and you've got your two sons kind of following in your wake here, taking yourself back to 1989, if you were talking to yourself then, is there any advice you would have given to that 18, 19-year-old going in, or maybe made a different call along the way?
I'm sure there's some things I could probably, give some thought to on that I'd like to do different. But as far as my aviation career, try harder.
Really?
No, absolutely.
In what way? I mean, that's hard for me to hear because, and just don't mean to interrupt. I just want to say it. I distinctly remember when you were on the roster and you're flying with JT, you were thinking, this is like playing a pickup game with Michael Jordan, basically. Like, you got to be at the top of your game. Things are going to go well. JT's going to carry it. But at the end of the day, you want to be able to walk off the court thinking, I did my best. JT's going to look at me like I did, that sort of thing. So it's hard for me, and I'm sure there are a lot of people who know you who will say, how could he not have thought that he did his best? So what is that in your mind?
You always look back and say, I could have done something a little bit better. I mean, no one, Michael Jordan.
Yeah.
I guarantee you, I don't care if he hit 63 in that game, he probably wished he'd scored 65.
Maybe his baseball career.
Yeah, well, I'm sure. Another story there. But yeah, I mean, I just wish I look back, and again, like I said, I've always been, I think, good at self-critiquing myself and staying focused. But, there's some times that I could have done better. I could have tried harder. I could have flown more. I could have, especially I look back on the missions and, one particular mission, which I'm surprised you didn't mention, but it was one with you and I, there when the FOB got attacked. And that was one I critiqued myself hard on. I really did. I took it hard. I critiqued the shit out of myself because I thought we, and me mainly, could have done a hell of a lot better job, And not that none of the ground guys really, no one got hurt. Ended up being successful, but I just felt like it was out of sorts. And maybe it was because they were attacking our FOB.
I remember us eating midnight chow and getting the call.
Yeah.
The base is under attack. And we were sprinting to the aircraft, which is not a good combination of having just had an omelet
yards away too,
running with pilots.
Right.
Taking off for that. And I think in that case, I do remember that very well. I was in the back seat for that, which is probably one of the bigger problems we had, which was I needed more experience in the back seat, but really, should I have been in the back seat? No.
That's why I critiqued myself.
And myself. I mean, you say that, but
but I was the Air Mission Commander. I should have, and that was one of the big things because I'm sure, as you remember, we almost mid-aired with Nate.
I do.
And I lost you for a few seconds.
Yeah. So when you were talking about your experience at flight school, where the IP kind of took the controls, you landed, he was irate, I was thinking in my mind, that was almost us, and JT was not irate.
Right.
JT was so calm, and I remember thinking, I think I said to you, because we were just climbing for a moment, and it was quiet intentionally, and I think you said, hey, are you all right? Yeah, just need a minute, and then we got back into it.
Right. Yeah.
But that was tough. For me personally to come back from that was tough.
Oh, yeah.
Especially with you in the cockpit at the same time thinking, oh, my God.
Right. Well, that was the moment I started critiquing the shit out of myself, was that, why did you put him back there? Why, this was not the time, but that's how we were set up.
That's right.
But we weren't prepared, neither one of us at that point. Like I said, you needed more experience, and we would have probably done a hell of a lot better job with me in the back and you in the front, because you would have been more comfortable and I would have been more comfortable.
For sure.
And so, again, like I said, those are the things I look back on, wish I'd done better. No harm, no foul. No one got hurt. It was a success in the end, but I could give you 1,000 instances of that in my career, at least 1,000, and just, you always want to do the best. You want to be the best. I mean, you want to, and not because you want people to think you are. It's just because at the end of the day, again, my time's up. I go to No Mercy now, and half those guys don't even know who the hell I am, and that's okay. But to me, I have to sleep with me, and go, did you do the best you could? And if the answer is no, then you got work to do.
And you say you're done with it, but I still think you're kind of passing on some of that expertise in the role you're in today.
Absolutely. I'm very lucky in that in my retirement job, I still train them, even though it's not in an actual aircraft in the simulator, and I'm able to impart a lot of wisdom and knowledge that I gained over the years from other guys like me, to make sure these guys are ready to go down range. I mean, they're good. No Mercy's going back to Afghanistan in June, and so when I do get a chance to get in the AVCAT with them, I put the screws to them, and I make sure they because I do have something still to
and
give.
that could be Brent soon, right?
Oh, absolutely, and believe me, he and I will have a ton of talks before he goes down range, because my biggest thing to him is going to be, I don't care if you're flying with the Battalion SP, don't think they won't try and kill you. I mean, it's true.
You got to have that responsibility.
Absolutely. I've flown with the guy. The most experienced aviator I've ever flown with was the one who tried to kill me. W5 Vietnam vet tried to kill me. So, if you let your guard up, I mean, there's a reason there's flight controls in both stations. And I don't care if it's Chuck Yeager. I'm guarding the control.
You're watching.
I'm watching, I'm aware. So,
last question.
Sure.
You, obviously we talked about your old man. You worked a lot with JTACs, air to ground. You did deliberate operations with special forces teams, both U.S. and international. You've worked with some of these other countries. If you were going to interview someone, this type of interview, what MOS or branch of service would you be interested in hearing? The kind of what it's like when they're in their element.
It would probably be, definitely be a ground guy. Would not be an aviator. It would be a door kicker. It would be probably someone from maybe like Task Force 310 or like the Task Force 66 guys we worked with in Australia. Seeing it from above just gives you a different perspective. And I've seen the video cams and things they used to wear in their helmets, and you kind of get an idea, but to put yourself in their shoes and to, be standing outside the door or about to go around that corner or getting ready to exit your vehicle and those types of things. I mean, you feel invincible when you're surrounded by, 18,000 pounds of armor and metal. But when it's just you and a breastplate and a helmet, that's got to be a completely different feeling. And I picked my son's brain when he got back, because they had a lot of attacks. A lot of UAVs were dropping little like grenades and shit on them. So I'm like, what's that? You're vulnerable, but their invincibility was one. He said having 64s overhead is a godsend. It just gives you that sense of invincibility, and also, of course, being in the armored up Max Pros and things that they travel in. So they do have that sense of security. But yeah, I think I would really like to interview the guys who. Like I said, the guys who have to breach that door, the guys who have to, go around that corner, the guys that have to go down that alley. I mean, that's a completely different perspective. I've seen it a million times from the air, but, And
it was always, I remember thinking in the air, it's tough up here, but at least I'm not down there in that vulnerable position. Exactly. And that's, I think, why a lot of us got into that Apache role, was to support those guys.
Absolutely.
And so I think we have this affinity for the guys who are on the front end of that spear kicking in a door. Oh,
absolutely.
Right?
We're the handle. They're the tip.
That's right.
I mean, that's all there is to it. I mean, we like to beat our chest and say we're all that, but no. That's
end of the day, it's these guys.
That's them, man. We can't hold ground. So
JT, I really appreciate all the time, the insight, kind of opening up about some of this. It's been great to see you again. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
I hope you enjoyed this combat story. If you want to tell your own story, go to combatstory.com. If you know someone we should interview, send me their info at ryan@combatstory.com. Hearing these stories can be tough or bring back your own memories. If you're battling PTSD, please call the Veteran Crisis Line at 1-800-273-8255. 273-8255. Stay safe.